All right, so let's see and review what we got, how far we got last time we met. We had created a React client, and we had installed several libraries such as the Bootstrap CSS library. We had installed the Font Awesome CSS library, right? We were playing around with the icons and the look and feel and creating tabs and lists and tables, right? Making it look pretty. And let's see. Yeah, that's the project we had created under WebDev Summer 2 2018 Client React. And I pushed it. It's available on GitHub if you want to take a look at what we worked on Friday, on Thursday. And we can start it by doing npm start. Let's see. Oh, I believe it might be already running. Let me turn that off. Do we have it running already? Yeah, I believe it's already running. So if we bring up the application at where's it waiting? Oh, is it 3000? Yeah. Yeah, 3000 is a very common port for developers to use. Yeah, so this is where we had left off, right? We were playing around with Bootstrap and Font Awesome, creating tabs and pills and lists and also creating cards. So let's move on and start looking at some of the concepts in React. We had created the entry point here in index.js. We had loaded the two basic libraries that we need, right? The React library and the React DOM. And here, there's the entry point, right, where we go get a root element, right, with an ID of root, right, and then we inject a React component, which in this case it's implemented here in the same local file as a React component. There it is, whiteboard. And this React component, whiteboard, has a mixture of HTML plus some custom React components such as topic pills, lesson tabs, module lists. Right? These are our own components that we built on Thursday. We also have a couple of instances of course cards, right, rendering at the bottom. And these themselves are either implemented here in the local directory, in the local file, or some of them we've moved over to separate files, right? Everything should be in its own file. Its own component, right, should be in its own file, yes? So for instance, we created the lesson tabs and the topic pills. We declare them in separate JavaScript files. There they are, right? But they themselves are just like these other ones, right? They're just classes. They're ES6 classes. That extend the React component class. And overrides, they all override this render function. Yes? And the render function, what they return a mixture of just normal HTML mixed in with some expressions, right? Some React expressions that are using some variables that are being populated for us when the component is instantiated, right? For instance, this props is mapped to any attributes that might be being passed as an argument, as a parameter when this was instantiated. So, for instance, module list item, presumably down below we have a couple of these module list items. There they are, and we are passing as an argument, as a parameter, the title with a value. In this case, it's a string value, right? And it's available inside of the component through a property, right? Through a property called props that's bound to the instance of the component. So this.props is a map of all the attributes that you might pass in as an argument. In this case, we're only passing the title, right? But we might pass all sorts of things, right? When does the module start? When does it end? Whether it's publicly available, whether you have to pay for this or whatever, right? Any parameters that you might pass around would be available through the this.props property of the component. Okay, all right. Let's see. We're also using module list as I believe we're using it elsewhere. Module list. Where is it that we used it? I think, yeah, there it is, as module list, as one of the components that we're using to render our whiteboard. Right now, it's this one right here, right? Module list. It's declaring an H1 with module list, plus a UL has been styled with a bootstrap, right, to be a list group, and then internally has module list items, which are these 4 over here, which basically is, what are they? They get rendered with whatever the return comes back with the render function, whatever the render function returns. In this case, it returns an LI. So there's 4 LIs, right, because there's 4 module list items that uses the properties to render the title, and then on the right-hand side, it renders 2 icons on the right-hand side, right? So as a for delete and for edit, right? Pencil for edit and trash for removal. Okay, that makes sense? Everybody still with me? Yes. Is it better to put this style in line like that? No. CSS, yes, yeah. No style attribute in HTML. So okay. If we were to want to style this in CSS, obviously they're both I, and they both have this same. Oh, I guess you could do it by class. Yeah, it would be by class. You would create your own class, right? And you would import it. Is class name the same parameter as just class? Yeah, it would be class name. Oh. Yeah, class name. Oh, it's just like with a dot. So whatever the dot name. Yeah, just like a class. Just like a class. Yep, like a regular class. All right, so let's keep working on this. Let's see. Let's take a look at first to how to parameterize components. So what we'd like to be able to do is what I guess we went over this already on Thursday, and we already have examples on this. Basically, we want to be able to, if we have a component, we would like to be able to parameterize it, maybe pass it arguments and behave one way or another depending on our parameters. So here's a trivial hello world, and it's hard coded, right? It's just static. It just renders hello world. We did that on Thursday, and then we just use that component internally. But we like to be able to parameterize it. For instance. Instead of just hello world, maybe we would like to be able to pass as an argument a message that we want to parameterize, right? That we want to pass in. So here's a component called message that we can parameterize. Maybe we can pass it properties or attributes as part of the attributes that you can pass in as like a regular attribute you would expect in HTML. Right, so for instance, you can pass just a plain old string. We did this for the module list, right? For the module list, we use this technique to be able to create 4 different module items, right? And the title is parameterized. So same thing here, right? We're creating a generic message component, and then we're passing a message attribute with a string value, and then internally we can use the props.message to retrieve the value of that attribute message. So hello world 2 would be then rendered as H1 over here. Okay. All right. So here's something new that I'd like to introduce to you: stateless components. Okay. Right now, the components that we've been using are plain old classes, right? Yes. Yep. Okay. So when would you reference like an object? Right, so it depends what you're passing. In this case, it's a plain old string, but we could pass an entire object, right? And that object might have several attributes within attributes within attributes, and then you would navigate it using dot notation. Yeah, so here's just a plain old string, but we could pass a JSON object, right? So whatever Yeah, so so this dot props dot, that's the name of the attribute, so it would be dot message, right? But if if that object has other attributes inside, you can navigate through them using dot notation. Yeah, yeah. So let's take a look at it. Let's work on that. So for instance, module in this case is only receiving just a title. Okay, but it could be an entire object, right? Like a module object, right? In module items, let's look for where it's being used. Right now, it's just a plain old string that we're passing along, but it could have been an object that we're passing here, right? So this could have been, instead of just a plain old string, we could pass an expression, right? And that expression might contain a JSON object, right? That might contain just a title. Title as, in this case, module 1. Okay, so let's revert this and convert this into JSON object that we're passing around. Oops. Copy. Okay, where this would be module 2, module 3, module 4. Okay, and this, let's see. Okay, so it's broken because it's looking for a title, right? It was expecting a string, right? Instead, it's receiving an entire object. Let's see. Keys, object is not valid, blah, blah, blah. If you meant to render children, instead, what line? Render. Oops, I think I broke beyond repair. All right, so let's see. Module list item is here. Props title. Do we have where are you using this? Oh, we need a key also. Usually when you're iterating and you have an X, you probably need a unique identifier here, key. And key, when it has multiple objects of the same type, right, it needs to be able to uniquely identify them, and typically it asks for a unique identifier such as key. So let's add that. I think it was complaining that it didn't have a key. Child phone keys title. If you meant keys title object found with keys. If you meant to render a collection of children, use an array instead. Title module 2. Let's see. Actually, this is a good segue to the following. Instead of rendering like this, ideally this would be an array of objects. So let's play around with that first. So for instance, we can declare an array of objects, right? So for instance, we can say in the constructor, again, this is a class, right? A CS6 class, and to instantiate, you can use a constructor. You declare the constructor. You need to, because you're inheriting from component, it is required that you call the super constructor components constructor. Okay, and here we can declare variables. One of the variables that is part of this of the specification is the state variable. Right, the state variable is a well-known supported element of the component. So we can declare here state, and we can initialize it and say that the modules, right, might be an array of modules that might contain multiple objects, so multiple JSON objects. So we could copy here. Let me see something. Title, let's copy these over here. And let's put them right here. With several of these. And instead of having 4 of these, right, what I'd like to be able to do is iterate over them. All right? Where the title, in this case, let's go back to just a string. Right now, we just have QWE. We'd like to be able to iterate over this this array of modules in the state object, right? So there's a couple way of doing it. We could do it right here. Embed an expression here. We can embed an expression that we can calculate this on the fly, where we can do we can say this dot state dot modules, right? And we can just render maybe the length. And it would render, do we need to, did I spell it wrong? Length. Notice that it renders as 4, right? So right now we're just calculating the some attribute of that array. But instead we could iterate over that array. We can say map. Map is a function that iterates over this, right? It applies a function that you pass as an argument, and then it concatenates the results. It accumulates those results as the return of the entire map, right? So for instance, we're going to map. As it maps, it iterates over the elements in the array, and it passes it as an argument to a function, whatever function you give it. Okay? So you can use the old style, where this is it would be an anonymous function, and you pass in the module as an argument, right? And whatever you return here will be concatenated together, right? So for instance, it might be return, and let's return maybe just module.title. Right. Notice that what it did is that it took those strings, module 1, module 2, module 3, module 4, to concatenate them, right? And it returned just a big string, based on the original strings. Or we could be a little more sophisticated, and we can say, instead of returning a title, we could just return the entire module list item. Okay, where the title is the module.title. Right. Right. Notice that it rendered fine. Right. Module 1, module 2, module 3, module 4, as we would expect. But notice that if we refresh, notice that there's some errors, right? That if we look at them, one of the errors is that it's missing the key property. See that? So to be able to optimize rendering, React wants to make sure that all the elements that is dynamically adding to the DOM, right? That they're uniquely identified, right? That it has a state array, right, that it's maintaining in memory, and it wants to know that this particular object is mapped to this particular DOM that it generated, right? It wants to make sure that there's a one-to-one relationship between what it has in memory and what's rendered in the DOM, right? And as it stands, it has no way to uniquely identify these. So ideally, it would use as an additional argument, it would use a key, right? The key would uniquely identify this. And you can uniquely generate this. It could be possibly the title itself. It's uniquely, in this case, it is a unique value. So we can use the title as a key. Right. Sorry. So we don't have the original error. Margin right. Oh, were we using margin right? Oh, we were using it for this for the. Okay, we'll take a look at that a little later. All right. So we have the key as a unique identifier. But this is kind of the old syntax of using just functions, right? ES6 has improved on this syntax quite a bit, right? And has made it very much less verbose, right? So for instance, well, I know it's a function. I know that it's going to give me an argument, right? So there's an alternative syntax to this that has become very popular, and it says, well, you don't have to tell me it's a function. You just need to tell me that there is an argument. And the function is mapped to something, right? This is the arrow syntax for the new syntax for functions, so this is an alternative way of doing it. Notice that it renders exactly the same way, right? And if you have a return, If the only thing you're doing is a return and there's no calculation inside of the function, you can even make it even much less verbose. You can remove this curly bracket. You can remove this curly bracket, and you don't even need the return, right? You just need the expression. Whatever that expression is the return, is an implied return. Make sense? Right? So something that would have been a little bit more verbose, you can now just write it in a single line. Right? So it's much easier to read. You just need to be cognizant of this new syntax, and we're going to be using this syntax quite a bit for the rest of the semester. Oh, great, made it worse. Just trying to get it out of the way. What was that? I made it worse for him. Okay, so if it's only one single argument, if it's a single argument, you can just give me the name of that one single argument. If it's more than one argument, then the parentheses is required. Right, so the parentheses is optional if you just have one argument. Right? But if you have more than one argument, it is required. So for instance, another argument that gets passed by the map function is the index as you iterate. Right? The second argument that gets passed is an index. So I here is an index, 0, 1, 2, 3, as it's iterating over that array. Right? And so we could use I here as a key. Right? We could use I here as the index. Right? So now we are certainly that's going to be unique. The title might, two modules might have the same title, so it would not be unique. And so React would complain, saying you have two DOM elements that I'm generating that have the same exact key. Right? So, but now, because I is unique within this context, it will not complain. Did that make sense? Yes?
Is I meant to be a random number? What is that? Where is the I?
So the map function is a function that iterates over a collection of in this case an array. This.state.module is an array, and as it iterates, it calls whatever function you give it, right? And the two arguments in that order. The first argument is each instance object in that array, right? And the second argument, if you want it, will be the index as it's iterating. Right? So we'll call this function repeatedly, right, for every single instance inside of that array. Right? And this syntax is actually becoming very, very popular, not only in JavaScript, but Java, the new version of Java, also has a very similar syntax. Right? It's where you have these anonymous functions all over the place, right? That's everybody okay? Right. So an alternative implementation of this could be that you actually declare a function, right? So called maybe render module list. Okay. And in that function, you can actually copy this entire code. Perhaps assign it to a local variable, let modules, right? And then return the modules. Okay, this is an alternative way of doing it. If you prefer to have a dedicated function that actually calculates this, and then you can call it. You can call it by argument. So instead of this implementation, you can say this dot render module list. Right, that's an alternative. Some folks prefer one way or another, but they're equivalent. Everybody okay? Yes. All right. So those are the two things that I wanted to cover as part of this set of slides. Being able to pass a parameter and be able to iterate over that parameter. Everybody okay? All right. The other thing that I wanted to cover was stateless parameterized components. Right? So, this is annoying. Can you see me there? So these components, well, this particular component, the module list component, is referred to as a stateful component. Right? Notice that it instantiates. It has a state variable in there, right? That is bound. Notice that the state variable is bound to the instance of this class, right? Of the object, and it stays with this instance, for the lifespan of this component, right? And for instance, as we go, we would want to, for instance, change the state of this component, right? Maybe we want to add a new module, we want to remove a module, we want to edit the title of a module, right? And we would do that by modifying the state of this component. Yes? So if a component needs to have a state, it would be implemented such as this. You would be a class, you would extend components, and then internally in the constructor you would initialize that state, right? And we would then, depending on what buttons you click and whatnot, you would modify the state. And whenever the state changes, React says, my state has changed. I need to update the DOM to reflect those state changes. Right? So if somehow I would remove a module from this array, then this function would be called again. Right? This function would run again, right? And it would re-update the list of elements. Yes?
I was just going to ask, is state basically the same thing as implicitly declaring, or declaring implicit fields as you do in Java? So with Java, for example.
Well, no, this would be specifically declared on the state variable. The variable has to be called state. So it's meant is by the framework looks for this particular variable and listens to changes on this particular variable. It declares several observers using the observer pattern, and anything that changes, whenever that object changes, it triggers, it notifies a whole bunch of other internal magic, right, to kick off the rendering again. So no, it's not on any variable. It's only on that particular variable. Yeah. Yeah. What was I saying? Right. So this particular module list might be reasonable to maintain its state. Like the list of all the modules. Yes. Right. But some components might be trivial or too trivial to that they don't have a state. Okay. You just give it data and they render that data, but they don't have to maintain a particular state. Right? You just give it, hey, render this. For instance, this particular one, so module list item is not maintaining any state. Right? It's basically you're just giving it the data, in this particular case, the title of the module, and it just renders it. Right? It doesn't have to maintain any state about the module. Make sense? Right? So this particular element, a component here, would be a great candidate for a stateless component. All right, for stateless components, which we already know how to build anyway, right? If you have any component and you just don't have the this.state, you are a stateless component. All right? But what I want to point out is that if you don't need the state, there is an alternative syntax that you will see a lot in the documentation. All right? So that's why I wanted to point out the comparison between, or the contrast between stateful components, right, and stateless components. Right? So this one is already a stateless component, right, because there is no this.state. But what you'll see often out in the documentation, you'll see that stateless components will use a reduced syntax. Right? It will be a syntax that is much smaller and reduced than this. What you'll see a lot is that instead of using an actual class, they'll use just a function, right? And if you remember JavaScript, any function can be a class, right? If you call that function with new, right, and you give it the name of that function, it is a class. It instantiates whatever you have in that function. Okay. So let's implement an alternative syntax here to show you how to use instead a function, right, to implement this. Right. So let's take a look at. So here's the stateless alternative. Yes, the stateless alternative is to use the new and improved arrow function syntax, right, that we just declared, that we just showed you. Right? So here's a trivial component, a trivial stateless component called stateless, right, very appropriate, that takes as argument an attribute, and then it renders this as h1. All right? That's all it does. Right? So it doesn't do much. So let's use this same idea to rewrite module list item. Right? So let's rewrite it. Okay? So this is going to be a constant function called module list item stateless. I'm going to leave the stateful one there, and this is going to take an argument, title, and it's going to use the new arrow syntax, right, of ES6, and it's just going to return basically this, right here. It'll return this li. I'm just going to copy it straight from here. I'm just going to put it here. But instead of this dot properties, it'll be the title argument that it passes in through here. Did I miss something? Oh, I'm missing an equal sign right there. So there we go. So we have a function. This is just a straight up function, right? But using the new ES6 syntax, right? This is a function called module list item stateless. It takes as argument an attribute called title, right? And then it's returning just plain all JSX. So it's identical to the one below, but instead of using a class, it's using the new ES6 function syntax. One other thing is that let's take a look at it. Let's use this. Let's take this, and instead of using the module list item, let's replace our implementation here. Instead of module list item, we'll do module list item stateless. Okay, so if we go back and re-render this, notice that it works the same way. Right? It looks exactly the same way. Just to prove to you, it's a little bit different. We'll put here stateless. Yeah, it's that one, right? Stateless is rendering. Make sense? All right. The other thing is that since it's only returning this, we don't even need the return. Right? Because we said, right, if it's just if it's not computing anything, right? If it's not going over a for loop and calculating and if statements and whatnot, if it doesn't have a body, right? If it's just returning something, the return is a return. Oh, okay. I think I don't even need the curly brackets. There we go. All right. I don't even need the curly brackets. So I would need the curly brackets if I'm going to do a for loop and I iterate and there's computation and I calculate something, right? And then I return something. Right? But in this case, there's only one statement, and then the evaluation of the whole function just evaluates to this expression. Make sense? All right. So you'll see this syntax a lot. Right? So I just wanted to point out that to you. All right. Excellent. So we cover parameterize stateless. We covered rendering content. So yeah, it was module list item, and then we use the property titles to render it, and then we pass as argument the title. We created an array, right, as part of the state. Then we iterated over that, yes, returning each one of these, and then return the object, the entire object. Excellent. All right, so let's talk about forms. Right, let's talk about forms. So ideally, what I'd like to be able to do is to manipulate this array here, right? That currently we have this array of modules, and ideally, what I'd like to be able to do is to do two things. One of them is be able to add to this array, maybe push more content onto the array, or I'd like to be able to remove elements that are already in the array. Okay, and as I manipulate this state object, what will happen is that React is listening to changes on that particular variable, right? And if any changes happen to that particular variable, it will trigger notifications to its internal process to re-update the DOM. Right? What it will do is that it will say, oh, those stage changes would recalculate the DOM to look like this, right? And what we'll do, what it will do is that it will do a difference between the current DOM and the DOM that it would be generated. And it will look at the difference and say, oh, only this would change. Only this one new DOM element would change, right? And that's the only change that it would make to the DOM. Right? That's why folks have reported that React is fairly quick, right, at manipulating the DOM, right? Because it keeps track of a virtual DOM, right? It does not directly manipulate the DOM. Well, obviously, eventually it manipulates the DOM, but first it keeps track of a virtual DOM, document object model, right? And it keeps track of what has changed. Right? For instance, if I any changes, right? If I make changes maybe to this little title here and this card, I wouldn't want to have to re-render the entire page. I mean, that's the whole point of creating single-page applications, right? Otherwise, we would have gone back to rendering this on the server, right? The whole point of single-page applications is that we can manipulate, just snippets of the DOM, right, and be very, very efficient at rendering our content. So React is well known for its being able to optimize these kinds of manipulation. All right, so let's take a look at working with forms. Right? I like to be able to, for instance, have a form element up here, and that when I click on the form and I add a new title, a new module, it would add it, right? It would append it to the bottom of the list. Right? I like to be able to push a new object. So let's work on that next.